Good morning from West Potomac High School. I'm Tucker Isley from my house because I woke up not long ago. Well, I'm welcoming you to the third presidential debate between Jamie and Miriam. No answer should exceed 2 minutes. I have the option to extend it, but I probably won't. Let's see here. The first question, as determined now, will go to Jamie. Jamie, your campaign primarily focuses on cutting down on fossil fuel use and being good to the environment. How do you plan on cleaning up the earth and cutting down on fossil fuel usage and whatnot without taxing excessively?
So, currently the 2019 budget gives the EPA probably $264 million to further advance our knowledge for sustainable lifestyles and all that. But then also, if you look at the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, they say it would cost around $13 trillion to stabilize our emissions and $44 trillion to move the power grid away from fossil fuels. And I know that's a lot of money, but that's over like a course of a couple of years. I don't really remember how many. But in order to be the school, I do think we have to raise taxes specifically for the wealthy, because there are a lot of things we have to change in order to reach that goal. And now, I know that seems like a lot of money, but the thing is, eventually it will pay off, and we won't have to be spending as much money and taxing as excessively in the future. So, when we switch to renewable energy sources, first things first is most of the money will be spent to establish and to make these sources like solar panels and wind turbines and dams and all that. But once we already make them, all we have to do is keep up with maintenance. And that just costs significantly less than actually building this, so the taxes would then, decrease, right? It won't be high forever. Also, there are a lot of health-related issues that come with climate change and horrible environments like asthma and cancer from like UV rays and stuff like that, and chloria. So if we fix the environment now, we don't have to spend as much money on issues like that, and we can kind of just reshape the way the budget's working and not have to tax as heavily. Also, I think that if we just I think that if we kind of focus more on more renewable and natural sources like solar power and wind turbines and dams instead of nuclear power, it will also cost significantly less. Nuclear power not only does have a really, really high risk, but it's also really expensive. It costs about $112 per megawatt hour compared to like the 46 it would cost for solar and like the $30 it would cost for wind. So not only does it cost a lot to make, but it also just costs a lot to keep up with and to constantly maintain, especially because we don't really know all the logistics and so much behind it. That, and it also costs a lot to dispose of. And we see this with the Love Canal and the Superfund Act. It costs a lot of money to fix up toxic waste sites, and we can't afford to keep doing that. We can't afford to keep messing up things, ruining land, and then having to fix it with other things that cost money and tax people. If we're gonna tax someone, we have to take it and make initiative instead of cleaning up something that we've already messed up. And the Love Canal, that costs like $400 million over 21 years. It costs a lot of money just to fix up that toxic waste site because it was so bad that no one could live there. It leads to spaces where no one can be used when they could easily be utilized for things like wind turbines and solar panels and all that. Can you repeat the question?
Well, that was focused on Jamie, so. The question was, how would you plan on doing this without taxing excessively, like cleaning up the environment and stuff?
Okay, so I agree with Jamie in the sense that our environment is a big threat right now. It is a concerning issue that is facing us. And in the sense of taxing the wealthy, I do agree. We do definitely need to tax the wealthy because CEOs and major corporate owners make about 300 times the amount of an average worker, but yet are not paying like the right amount of taxes proportionally to make it fair for everyone living in America. Now, the thing is, I don't think we should be taxing heavily necessarily, but just making it more equal throughout the United States. In regards to going back to the environment, that is like we're looking at it at like very specifically. Yes, again, I agree 100% that we need to make we need to start taking initiative into like bettering the environment. But looking at it as a whole, we need to start coming up with solutions that are actually going to work. And instead of identifying, you know, the problem versus like a solution, we need to work in that middle ground of how we're going to get there. Again, going back to my platform of decreasing our foreign involvement in other countries, taking that budget that we use in military funding or in funding overseas in general, we could use to solve issues in our own countries, such as climate change, such as the environmental issues that we have going on right now. And instead of, you know, working like very, I guess, short term, we need to start looking at the long term effects of it. Once we start decrease spending and we start putting that money towards other issues that, again, we need to solve in this country, such as gun control, such as education, such as healthcare, such as the environment, we will be looking at a more long-term solution rather than just, you know, taxing the wealthy and then doing, you know, coming up with small fixes here and there. So looking back at, you know, the bigger issue and like taking a broader stance on it, we definitely need to come up with long-term solutions. And I believe that, you know, by taking a stance in decreasing the amount of spending that we are putting towards, you know, our involvement in other countries, that is very unnecessary, should be taken into account when we look at solving issues in our own country.
I agree with you. I think we have to consider the U.S. first before we consider anything else, especially in terms of the environment, because if we don't fix what we're doing right now, there will be no other things in the future to spend money on, because there will not be a future eventually. It might not be right now, but it's going to happen, and we have to, this is currently happening, and it's something we do have to fix right now. We have to fix it and make it a priority.
So, Miriam, would you say that it's more important to decrease taxation among the poor, or more important that we increase taxation among the wealthy?
I say that it's more important that we increase the taxes amongst the wealthy. Now, the reason why I say this is we have, like, again, huge CEOs and people who are making like over billions of dollars, but that are still not paying the right amount of taxes that they should be, in order to, again, make it proportionally stable amongst all American people. Now, by taxing the wealthy, they make up like a very small portion of the American people. So even by taxing them or raising taxes, we wouldn't be hurting them in any sort of way. They would still have enough money to live, you know, like any person should, with like sources to give, such as like water and stuff, just basic necessities. They would have all of that still readily available to them. So even just because we're increasing taxes doesn't mean that we're taking away their money that they could use elsewhere. They would still have a great amount of wealth, like with their like names and stuff. So again, I feel like going back to solving like bigger issues in our country, taxing the wealthy would be a huge help towards putting that money like in other areas such as education. And even though it would be a small amount comparatively, it's still a change and it's still money coming from somewhere that we could definitely use.
I agree with her. I think that it is more important to tax the wealthy instead of decreasing taxes for with people who don't make as much, because we still have to make up the money somehow. And I'm not saying we should get all of our money from the taxes. I agree that we have to kind of move around the budget. There are other things we should prioritize instead of like troops and all that. But I mean, yeah, I do think we should increase taxes on the wealthy.
Okay, let's switch up the topic here because you guys are just agreeing nowhere. Okay. Do you think we should limit the power of our police officers, even though it puts public protection at risk? Jane.
Wait, I'm sorry, repeat the question.
Do you think we should limit the power of police officers, even though it puts our protection at risk? Jamie?
I don't think limiting the power of police officers would actually put the safety of the public at risk, because as you've seen with a lot of the whole police brutality and things, I think police officers kind of have too much power. I think they have too much power to the point where it's actually putting the public safety at risk instead of them not. Yes. So I think it kind of comes down to how they're trained and how they're prepped for this. I mean, I think we should like reform the way police think, the way they think, and the way they kind of go about their day. I don't think they should be going around thinking, I'm the strongest person here, I have the most power, so obviously whatever I do is something good. A lot of the time they justify their actions by saying they're saving someone else, but in reality they're not, they're hurting people. And I think it comes down to how they're trained. And I think actually the best way to do that is basically creating a Hippocratic oath like doctors have, but for police officers, in the same way where they make sure that they know that they're here to serve, they're here to help other people, they're not here to be the most powerful person in the room. So I think by creating a Hippocratic oath kind of for them would make a lot of issues less.
Yeah.
I agree in the sense that police officers do need to be they do need to be held more accountable for what they have been doing. Just in the past year, 52% of police officers reported that it's not unusual for law enforcement officials to turn a blind eye to improper conduct of other officers. So just hearing that statistic in itself shows how corrupt the system really is. And even looking back, even going as far as taking a look at what Congress has done to implement any strict laws, they haven't, and they're not currently looking into that like at all. So the issue, again, we need to focus on bettering our own country. We have issues that take us way back that we shouldn't have as of 2019. We're so heavily invested in other countries and what their issues are, but not looking at what basic issues that we have, such as racial relations. Which again, we're in 2019. It should not be this hard to like maintain something that should already be like a standard for the American people, which is equality amongst all. So if we continue to fund things that are again not focusing on ourselves, not focusing on the betterment of ourselves, of our people who we are directly concerned for, who we are directly representing, then what are we doing with our time and like as a government of the United States? Again, race relations is a huge issue that is facing our nation, which we should be more focused on. Now, the way that again I would go about taking looking at these issues is trying to make sure that police officers are not necessarily given less power, but are aware of what their power is and what it means. Now, that doesn't mean that you're allowed to abuse that power, you're allowed to go just by lessening your power, it means that we would be in any sort of harm's way, but it would basically be giving proper training, better training to police officers on how to handle situations. Most situations that have involved police officers where they've used force were situations where force was never necessary in the first place. So just training on basic stances on how to even be a police officer, which I think is very confused in our system right now.
So, do you think we should put police misconduct and moral misconduct on the same level of punishment?
Can you say that again?
Should we put police misconduct and normal misconduct, like among any other citizen, on the same level of punishment?
If you're talking about misconduct, like the same sort of crimes that are being committed, so again, I feel like when we're talking about our police force and looking at the people that we put, I guess, in trust of our own everyday lives, when we're going through, we trust the police to make the best decisions and make have our backs and being able to protect us. They should be held more accountable in the sense that they are supposed to be the quote unquote, example that they are setting like amongst all Americans, and they are supposed to be, making the right decisions lawfully and making sure that, we all are put on the same like equal like playing field, that no one is, being punished for like just because they committed the same crime, that they're being punished more just because of their race, color, ethnicity, whatever it may be. So if we set the example of, having police officers when they commit a crime, or when they, like unjustly, what's it called? Arrest someone, or, do something that is not very lawful, that when we set that example of having like punishment for them, then it also kind of creates, I guess, fear for others that, okay, if these officials are being held accountable for their actions, then so will we. And also, again, police officers are put on a higher pedestals because they do have a, responsibility towards the American citizens to protect them. So if they're not protecting us and if they're not being held accountable, then what does that say about our own citizens?
Okay, thank you. So, Jamie, let's talk about cyberterrorism. Should we forbid the ownership of certain things online that would allow a cyber terrorist to do things? Or, like, should we allow...
Can you specify
Alright,
what
alright.
things and ownership of said things and actions?
Should we put up more, like, online barriers? Or kind of limit the censor things people can do online, even though it would infringe on our, like, own freedom in America?
So are you asking me, I'm sorry, this is like clarification.
Yeah.
You're asking me, do you think we should put censorship, like, do I think that we should have censorship to decrease cyber terrorism? Is that what you're asking me?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. I think no. I would need some more clarification on what type of censorship you are talking about, but in terms of just like general, like, this is something I want to put up online and I think this, and this is something I want to talk about on this certain website. I think online is a safe space for people to talk to other people who also believe in the same thing, to get research for certain things, to post a picture of something they really like, to share their art, to sell something. It's somewhere where people can talk and people can just kind of be a community with people they can't see directly face to face. And I know that creates a lot of issues with the whole, like, especially when you're younger, the first thing you kind of learn from your parents is don't trust anybody you meet online. But I feel like if we censor it too much, we're kind of taking away from that world and that space we've kind of created, where it allows people to freely kind of express what they want to do, look up what they need to know. I think it's a spot for learning, and I think it's a spot for sharing, and I think too much censorship in that would just kind of take away from that. But I also think that we should kind of emphasize and continue to teach the whole don't trust who you meet online, don't always fall for these things, don't send money to that Nigerian prince who emailed you 2 days ago, that type of stuff. I think that's kind of, even though our technology, especially in children, has increased, I think that type of scare tactic has kind of decreased. I feel like it's not as like emphasized anymore, especially with kids, because you're so used to seeing children with little iPads now, you don't really make your kid know that they can't be clicking on things like this and they can't be kind of falling into those traps. I think that was your question. I'm so sorry if I did not understand it.
It's okay.
I don't think the issue is necessarily like censoring our own, like government, but more of making our like cybersecurity stronger. And again, with our society becoming more and more heavily reliant on technology and becoming more technology based, that cyber terrorism is becoming like a bigger and bigger threat to us. So the issue with cyber terrorism and us being able to create, stronger cybersecurity is, again, goes back to funding and having the right amount of funds to be able to create like stronger firewalls and stronger security. Again, with the over $700 billion put into funding the military, and that includes, you know, us being involved in other countries. We could use that towards creating a better cybersecurity. Whereas right now, most of the cybersecurity threats are domestic, and only about 0.1% are from other governments that are threatening us. So again, looking at our involvement in other countries is just it's more and more clear that us being heavily involved in countries isn't as necessary as we think it should be. We are not currently under attack where we need to constantly be putting money into our military to fight in other countries, but more so we need to focus on creating making sure that our country is safe, so that way if there is an attack, we have those preventative measures that we have been taking in order to protect ourselves. So I don't think that censoring is the right way to go, but more so we need to focus on creating a bigger safety net and making sure that we have stronger cybersecurity, so if there were to ever be a threat, that we have something to kind of fall back on.
Okay, so Miriam, what would you say is the most important issue facing the country? Hi. What would you think is the most important issue facing the country today? Focusing on punishing police officers who do wrong and abuse of power, or cutting down on the cyber terrorism?
I believe that the biggest issue right now is most definitely working on police brutality and having race relations attached to that. Again, cyber terrorism is just a way, and us being able to properly secure ourselves is a good preventative measure that we should take. But currently, something that is directly facing the American public currently that is actually affecting thousands and thousands of citizens as of right now is, you know, our relationships with the police force. And not bettering that, again, is creating more and more of an issue in our own country. Just in the past year, we've heard so many stories about issues involving police officers where, again, the force that they used was never needed. And to hear those things and to hear that, you know, the motivation behind it was because of, you know, someone's skin color is sad to hear, because again, it's like we're going back in time. And in order for us to progress as an American society and as, you know, the world's leading power, is that we fix these issues that should not be issues in the first place. We need to, again, better our police force and better the education of these police officers that are, you know, abusing their power constantly. And again, creating that trust between Americans. If we are not setting a good, if we're not focusing on our own selves right now and focusing on the betterment of others, then what do we expect to do in other countries? What is our purpose to go into other countries? Again, this is an issue that is currently not being taken care of properly or not being addressed in the specific ways that it should be. It's, yes, you know, we hear about it, but even there are not proper statistics to back up this information, just because of how unaccountable these police officers are held to their actions. So again, if we don't fix this issue right now as it is with, you know, police officers and race relations and, you know, hate crimes, then there is no point in going to other countries and trying to solve their issues when we can clearly not solve our own.
Yeah, I don't think the American citizens should live in fear. I agree with that, and I think the whole fear of a physical threat coming from a police officer is significantly more than the threat of someone kind of reaching into your Amazon account and taking your money or something like that. I think that there isn't enough being done in terms of police conduct, where I think we should have some focus on that and kind of think about reform, but I don't think we should take all of our attention away from cybersecurity. I think we have a decent amount of attention on that issue, and I think we should just put some more on police conduct. I think they should both be issues that we're addressing. I just think the whole physical issue and living in fear of walking in your own streets should not actually exist. I don't think anybody should be afraid to go outside, be afraid to go out in the city and all that. I think that issue is something we should focus on, because cyber terrorism already gets a lot of focus.
Okay, well, I'm out of questions, so
5 minutes.
5 minutes. Are you saying we should go for 5
Yes.
minutes? Okay, let's see here.
Does anyone in the audience actually have questions?
Oh, I think I have a question.
Okay.
Where's Caitlin? Foreign policy. Yeah, that's cool. Miriam, you said before when we were talking like that day, like a week ago, I don't really remember what it was. You wanted to have free healthcare and education. How do you plan on going about that?
Like I was saying earlier, we are currently what we have passed for the 2019 budget of military spending this year was set for over $700 billion, and now that number wasn't, thought, like it wasn't, no one had, like, it wasn't thought of for a very long period of time. It was thought of very quickly, and it was almost given as, like, we're just supposed to constantly, like, aid our military just because it's our military. Now, that spending hasn't necessarily proven to be beneficial in any sort of way. And that goes, again, with putting our troops into other countries and doing that. We haven't necessarily set a good tone of involving ourselves in other countries, and by doing so, we're using that military funding and that $700 billion, which is a huge chunk of money that we could be using towards freeing like education and the healthcare system. Education is a huge issue in this country. It's almost as if it's becoming more and more impossible to achieve education here in this country, as well as healthcare. Having basic like abilities to go to the doctors or being able to be provided for medically is becoming like a foreign concept, which again should not be the case. We need to use that money to directly better like our citizens and what their money should be going towards, because if we're not bettering our own country, then again, why are we in other countries? Why are we going to go aid them when we can't aid our own people? So by decreasing the military funding, by taking that $700 billion, or not, again, and when I say, we should decrease, I'm not saying that we should take the whole $700 billion. Sorry, I like to correct myself. We should be taking some of that 700 and using that towards, education or healthcare or just any other issue that is facing us right now.
Okay. Now I'm truly out of questions.
Isn't the military budget often actually used to finance things like education and healthcare spending, though? For example, the fact that one of the best ways to have your college education or, say, your medical degree financed is through the military, where currently that's one of the best options for a lot of people who maybe don't have as many social economic resources to finance college, is to go through the military, or the fact that a lot of medical research is financed through the military.
But that's going into the military. So for those who are not in the military,
Through the military.
No, but you're saying that education, like specifically talking like about education, that's if going to the military. So that's taking everyone else who is not going into the military or plans on to go into the military, like they're unaccounted for. Like those are the people that I'm talking about, that we need to look at Americans as a whole, not just who is getting like the benefits through going to the military or not. So using that $700 billion, again, I'm not saying that we need to cut it completely, but I'm saying that we need to decrease those efforts. Half of that money goes to other countries, foreign countries, to either aid them, but again, aiding them doesn't necessarily mean that we're helping them out. It's just so we're technically helping ourselves out. We're not really, aiding anyone. And if you look at that, we see that like time and time again. So that $700 billion, I feel like definitely we need to use some of that towards, the military and having that. But again, a lot of that money is not being used properly or could be used in
like
things such as.
What is that money being earmarked for that you're saying specifically we should redirect?
So about 41% is being used for aiding other countries. And that 41% goes to, like, when we're talking about aid, we're talking about, like providing weapons to other countries, like oppositions that we are trying to fight, or, taking our troops into other countries. So things that 41% could definitely be decreased by a lot to help implement throughout like our own country to use that money towards our citizens. That could affect them directly instead of, you know, having this indirect contact that we're having right now.
That's 30.
Anyone else have any other questions?
So this is kind of a question for both of you. It seems that your stances on a lot of things are very similar. So is it safe to say that the main difference between your campaigns is that Marion, you're focusing more on education and healthcare, while Jamie, you're focusing more on clean energy?
Yes.
So is that a question?
Yeah, that's the question.
So, for I guess the biggest difference here is, I like Jamie. Yes, she has identified a problem and an issue that is, again, I completely agree with. Yes, we do. That is one thing that we agree on. However, I feel like the way that like my platform is designed is so that way we have identified a problem and we've come up with like a solution. But how are we going to get there? And I feel like my platform is actively working to create that, you know, bridge between the problem and the solution, and how we're going to like meet in the middle, and how we're going to go about solving or getting to
my
the
platform
solution.
doesn't do that?
No, so what I'm saying
Yeah.
is that
I haven't gotten a chance to see on it.
what I'm saying is that identifying just one problem and a solution is just one part of the whole issue. If we're only focusing on, again, one issue, and I'm not only focusing on education and healthcare, I'm saying that is a big issue, but again, I'm mainly focusing on things that affect our country. So yes, climate change does affect our country, which is what I'm concerned with. But education and healthcare is just something that I mentioned. But again, my platform, I feel like the biggest difference is creating that leeway and creating that bridge between like the problem and the solution.
Okay, so, I mean, I still think that my platform has that in between, and my in between is kind of not only switching over our energy sources, because by doing that we get a lot of jobs and stuff, but I think also stopping the whole urban sprawl thing. And I'm going to try and talk really fast because class is almost over, but urban sprawl, it's when people move out of the city into rural areas because housing is cheaper there, it costs less there, things just cost less. Even though the standard of living is significantly less, it costs a lot less to live in the rural areas. By doing that, it creates all these roads, which lead to a lot of emissions, and it takes money out of cities. I think if we stop that, and we utilize the land in cities, because by doing that, it leads to poorer parts in like inner cities, which leads to like really poor inner city schools and all that. I feel like if we stop urban sprawl, we can bring money back to cities, and we can utilize the land in the city to stop wasting land, stop wasting emissions, stop having to spend so much money on trying to fix the highways because everyone's trying to get to work. And I think we can get more money in the cities, get more things in cities, and find different ways. So one way we can fix the land in the city is by having more affordable housing and making that affordable housing with like passive solar heating or rooftop gardens or low flush toilets. All those things go in helping the environment, but we don't consider that a lot of the time when we're doing construction. I think if we take that land that's we're leaving there, all that unutilized land, and we build affordable housing, we can not only help all the people who are in the city that's now become poor because of urban sprawl, but we can also have a bit safer environment. Also, by doing all these different renewable energy sources, you're creating so many jobs. So many people have to build the solar panels, so many people have to help build a dam, so many people have to keep it up, so many people have to keep up maintenance. So I think that just creates jobs and just fixes the unemployment rate and poverty.
Aren't you potentially increasing issues of police brutality though, given that it's much harder for police to enforce in urban areas with a much higher population
I think in urban areas they already have a lot of force, but I feel like the issue is the whole minority people in urban areas